Well, hello everybody and welcome back to the next in our series of videos looking at Python programming. So today we're going to take a look at loops in Python and why you would use one and how you can use a loop. So what I'm going to do is to explain why we might use a loop in our code, I'm going to set an example. This is like an online series of sessions and I have many of you coders out there joining me. So let's say I want to write a program to welcome every person into our online sessions in Python, of course. So I have my blank Python file here ready to go. This is loopexample.py. So let's say I want to print a statement to welcome the first coder into the online session, which we'll call Bob. So we'll say, hello, Bob. Welcome. Right, be nice and friendly, set a good first impression. Now, let's say we get a second coder into our class and we want to say hello to that person as well. Hello, Emma. Welcome. Oops. Welcome. Remember, all our strings have to be surrounded by double quotes. Okay, and then let's say our popularity is increasing very fast. Hello, George. Welcome. Oh no, there's someone else joining the class. Oh, that's Susan. Let's welcome Susan into the class. Hello, Susan. Yawn. I'm getting tired. Welcome. Oh no, here comes a fifth person into our class. I don't want to write another print statement. I don't want to be writing the same line of code all over again for each new coder that we get into our online sessions. As it turns out, I don't have to. So we can use a loop in Python to repeat lines of code that we want to run more than once. So that's exactly what we'll do here. So let's, for argument's sake, let's save this file and let's just run it just so we can see what we have at the moment. So in my terminal here, I'm going to run Python loop example.py, and there's all our welcomes to our 4 coders. Okay, so now what we want to do now is we want to recreate this exact same output, but using a loop, so we don't have to be writing the same thing over and over again. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to comment out those lines of code. And we talked about comments before. Comments are used to stop lines of code from executing. I can get my cursor into the right place, that would be helpful. Okay, so I'll save that. Now, if I run that again, we won't get any output. No, nothing, because we just commented out those lines. Okay, so let's leave those there. We know what we want to get back to. So what are we going to do now? So let's look at a loop. Okay, so we have 4 names here, of 4 different coders in our virtual session. So we want to print out a hello and welcome message to each of those coders. So the easiest way to do this is to create a list. That's the other thing we're going to talk about today. We'll use a list to store each of the names of our coders who are joining our online sessions. Now, a list is a collection of items. It can be a collection of numbers or a collection of strings or a collection of other different types of data. So let's create a list of all the coders we have in our class, or in our online session. So we'll say coders equals. Now I could, if I was to do this, that's not good enough. That's only Bob. So we want to have more than Bob. We want to have our 4 coders in our list. So to create a list in Python, we use these square brackets. So we have an opening bracket and a closing bracket. And on my keyboard, my UK Ireland keyboard, the 2 square bracket icons are near the character P, or also near the enter key. So we can put a series of different items into our list here. So let's first put the first coder in there. We'll put Bob, the string Bob, into the list. So there's Bob. Now, if we want to add a second item into the list, we have to put a comma, and then we can put in the next item, which is the string Emma. Then we'll do another comma to separate the next item, which is going to be coder George. And then finally, we'll do one more to add the coder Susan. So you can see each item in the list has to be separated by a comma. We do not need to put, in Python, we do not need to put a comma after the last item in the list, but we need a comma after every other item. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 items in our list, the names of our 4 coders. And now what we want to do is we want to use a loop to go through each item on this list and welcome each of our coders. So just to recap, we've created a list of 4 items, 4 strings in this case. Lists in Python, to create a list, we use the square brackets around the collection of items we want. We separate each item with a comma. We do not need to put a comma after the last line or after the last item. And what are we doing? We're storing our list in a variable named coders. So coders is the list that will store all of the coders who are attending our online sessions. And we do have more than 4 people, just in case you're listening. I'm wondering, am I doing this class just for 4 people? No, we've many coders. Now we want to loop over every single item in this list and say hello to each of them. So let's do that now. So now we're going to actually use the loop. Now there's different types of loops in programming, but the simplest and most common kind of loop you would probably use is something called a for loop. F-O-R, a for loop. We use a for loop in Python to repeat lines of code a specified number of times. And what we want to do is we want to say hello 1, 2, 3, 4 times to each of our coders. To create a for loop, we use the word for, just like this. Then what we need to do next is we need to give a variable. We need to use a variable to store the name of each person each time we go through the list. So each time, so the first item in the list is Bob, the second item is Emma, the third item is George, and the fourth item is Susan. We need as we loop over each item in the list, we need a variable to store whichever item we are currently at as we loop over. And in this case, we have coders. So we have a list. Our coders list is a list of names. So I'm just going to call my variable name. For name, and then we say what list do we want to loop over. To do that, we say in, and the name of the list we want, coders. This can be read as for each name in coders. This is the name of the variable that will store the name of the current person that we are looping over. This is the name of the list we want to loop over. For is the keyword we use in Python to create a for loop. And in is another keyword in Python. So we're looping over all the items in a particular list. So we're looping over all the items in coders. And each time we loop through each item, they will be stored in the variable name. So that's how we create a for loop. And then what we have to do then, and this is our first time seeing this, you might have noticed that when I put my cursor at the end of this line and hit the enter key, Visual Studio Code has automatically moved my cursor in 4 characters. 1, 2, 3, 4. All the lines that we want to include as part of this loop have to be indented, or in other words, moved in. So we are indenting 1, 2, 3, 4 characters. Whoops, I beg your pardon. 1, 2, 3, 4. If we were to start writing code here, that's not valid. That wouldn't be considered in the loop at all. So let's have a look. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to print out our message. Print hello name welcome. There we go. So there's our loop. So for each name in the coders list, we want to print out hello to that person's name and then obviously the welcome message. So let's save that and we will run it. There we go. And it's almost exactly the same as what we said before. We've got hello Bob, hello Emma, hello George, hello Susan, and welcome to all of them. The only difference between what we had before and what we had down here is we now have an extra space between the end of the person's name and the exclamation mark. And that's because, as we showed in one of the previous videos, when we use the print function to print many items of data, when we use the commas, it puts a space between each piece of data. So it's putting a space between, in this case, it's putting a space between the person's name and the exclamation mark here. And we can see that without actually writing out print 4 times, it has said hello to each person. So it has repeated this line of code 4 times, once for each person in the list. So how did that work? The first time Python got to this line, it put the name Bob into the name variable and then printed out hello Bob. Once this line has executed, Python will then go back up and start the next loop. It will assign name to the next item in the coders list, which is Emma. So the second time it runs this line, the name variable will say Emma, will contain Emma, and it will print hello to Emma. Then it will then come back up to line 11, and it will set name to the next item in the list, which is George. And then it will run the print line for the third time with the name variable containing the word George. And then finally, it will come back up to line 11, and it will store the last item in the list, Susan, in the name variable. And then when it prints this line, this name line, or this print line, I should say, the name variable will contain Susan, and it will print hello to Susan. At that point, it will come back up to line 11, that it will see that there's no other items in the list. It has now looped over each item in the list. And at that point, Python will move to the next line outside of the loop, which in this case is line 13 or 14. And to prove that point, I'm going to put another print statement here. Let's pretend the class has ended and I want to say goodbye to everybody. I've said hello, so now I'm going to say goodbye. Let's run that and see what happens. So the loop has executed and has printed out the 4 hellos to each of our students or each of our coders. And then once it's finished in the loop, it comes down to the next line of code outside the loop, which in this case was the goodbye message on line 14. We only have one goodbye message. It did not print goodbye 4 times. Print is not indented under the loop like this. That means print is not part of that loop. If I had done this, what do you think will happen now if I run it? Let's have a look. Oh, it's printed hello 4 times. It said hello Bob, then goodbye, because print is now indented under the for loop, the same 4 spaces as the first print line. That now means that print is part of the for loop. So a for loop will print each line that's part of what's known as the body of the loop. So it's printing the first line of the loop, then it prints the next line of the loop, and it'll repeat that just like it repeated each name up here. So we've now got 4 goodbyes, a goodbye after each name. Now we certainly did not want that. We don't want to say goodbye to each individual. We want only one goodbye. So we bring the print line back to the start of the line, and it's no longer indented under the loop, which means that it's no longer part of the loop and it will only run once. And there we have it. That is a for loop in Python. We can now clean up the code we had up here because we no longer want to have any of that. We now have our elegant for loop. So we now only have the print statement once instead of repeating the hello message 4 separate times. That also means if we get another coder joining our class, if we have a Neil join our class, I don't need to change the loop. I don't need to create a new print statement for Neil. All I have to do is add Neil into the coders list, and I'll run the loop again. And now we just straight away, we just get a hello Neil message as well. So that's nice code, very nice. To add a student to the list, to the class, we only needed to change one line. So that's excellent. Now, there's lots of other ways we can do for loops in Python, but that is the end of this particular demonstration of how we can use a for loop to loop over a list of items. So in this video, we've looked both at how to use a for loop, and we've also looked at how to create a list of items in Python. So that's that for now. So thank you very much for joining, and I will see you in the next video.